All right, time to go teach. Hello and welcome to this episode of Tutors, where we're continuing our unit on ecology, and today we are looking at some trends that take place in ecosystems. So let's get started with our targets of the day. The first target is to describe 3 different important trends that exist in ecosystems. So that is our only target for the day. Biomass. First, we got to understand what biomass is. Biomass is the combined mass of all of the life in a specific ecosystem or in a given area. Whatever that given or measured area is, all of the life in that area would make up the biomass. This can be analyzed by the different trophic levels. We can measure out the amount of mass that happens to be in the producers, then how much mass would be in the primary consumers, how much mass would be in the secondary consumers, and so on and so forth. And the first trend that we should notice is that biomass decreases as we move from one trophic level to the next. There is less biomass in the secondary consumer level than there is in the primary consumer level. And there's less biomass in the primary consumer level than there is in the primary producer level. So we look at it a lot of times like a pyramid. And at the base of our pyramid, this would be the primary producers, where we are going to have all of the different plant life that is able to perform photosynthesis. Those are going to be our primary producers. If we took all of the mass of those primary producers within a given area, it is going to be much more than the mass of all of our primary consumers. The primary consumers might be very large organisms. We might have a hippo, for example. That's a large organism. But in comparison to the mass of all the grass that would actually be around that hippo, the hippo is not nearly as massive. So the primary producer level is going to have a lot more mass than the primary consumer level, which will also have a lot more mass than the secondary consumer level. That is looking at the trend of biomass. The biomass will decrease as we move from one trophic level to the next. This trend is actually due to available energy. The chemical energy that's stored in the organisms is going to also decrease as we move from one trophic level to the next. Most of the energy that it enters the trophic level is either going to be used up or it's going to be lost as waste. That means that only a small percentage of the energy that comes into the trophic level is actually going to be stored in the chemical bonds that make up that particular organism. And this is called the law of 10%, because it's approximately 10% of the energy that enters into a trophic level is maintained within that trophic level. The rest of the energy is used up either maintaining the characteristics of life or as waste. And that means, again, that as we move from one trophic level to the next, we end up with less and less and less available energy. There's less stored energy in the primary consumer level than the energy stored in the primary producer level. In fact, it basically goes down by 90% each step, or only about 10% of the energy is going to be retained going from one trophic level to the next. This means that if we have about 1,000 kilojoules in our primary producer level, we're only going to have about 100 kilojoules in our primary consumer level, and then we'll only have about 10 kilojoules in our secondary consumer level. Each trophic level only being 10% of the energy that the previous trophic level had. And that is the trend that we see with available energy, the energy that will be stored within the different organisms. And the last trend deals with something called biomagnification, which is also referred to as biological amplification. And that's where you're going to have an increase in the concentration of a specific chemical as we move up the food chain. The trend for biomagnification is the exact opposite from what we've seen for available energy and for biomass. Instead of decreasing as we move up the food chain, this increases in concentration as we move up the food chain. And generally, our focus is on toxins or pollutants because that's what we're mostly concerned about. We're interested in what impact harmful chemicals have on our food chain. Specifically, one of the most common ways that we will look at this is in marine ecosystems, where we can have zooplankton, which will consume some toxin. But then, as the zooplankton are eaten by small fish, the small fish is going to eat multiple zooplankton. And that means that the different toxins that were in that zooplankton is going to accumulate in greater amounts within that small fish. And then when those small fish are eaten by a slightly larger fish, those toxins are going to accumulate more in the tissues of that slightly larger fish. And as we progress up the food chain, these toxins are going to increase and increase and increase in the tissues of these different organisms. That is the way that biomagnification works. It's the exact opposite idea as what we had for biomass and for available energy. We start off with only a little bit of toxin within each organism to then, at the next trophic level, there is more, a higher concentration of that toxin within the organisms until we get to the highest of our trophic levels. That is going to have the highest accumulation of the toxin within its tissue. And this is why we need to be careful as we eat some species that are higher up in the trophic level. One of the toxins that we're concerned about happens to be mercury. And mercury, as we move up the trophic levels, increases more and more and more in the tissue of our organisms. And that is why we need to be careful with the fish that we eat on how much mercury has actually accumulated within their tissue, because mercury is obviously very toxic for us. So in summary, biomass, it decreases from one trophic level to the next. And available energy is also going to decrease as we go from one trophic level to the next. The amount of energy that's available in the next trophic level is going to be about 10% of what it was in the previous trophic level. But toxins, they are going to accumulate in higher amounts as you move up the trophic levels. You're going to have a much higher concentration of toxin within the species that are higher up on the food chain. And that, some ecological trends. Until next time, be awesome, stay awesome.